Oh hi. Haley asked me to tell you a bit about my life. It's written down in the book, Double Identity, by Margaret Hadlicks. My name is Bethany Cole, maybe it's Krull. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is my Aunt Merely. I didn't even know I had an aunt until a few months ago.
Hello. You can call me Aunt Merely.
This all started a few months ago when my parents woke me up one night and told me that we were leaving. Nobody would tell me where we were going. My mother would not stop crying. They had packed me a suitcase, and were very frantic. After a long car ride, we finally arrived at our destination.
Yeah. My house.
I had no clue where I was, and who you were. I just knew you were an aunt with white hair.
Haha, stop joking around, Beth. When you arrived, I was just as shocked. I had no idea you were coming. Your family kind of dropped off the earth for a while.
Anyways, I just remembered that I freaked out when my dad said I needed to stay here, at your house, so he could get help from my mom. And then you told me that I looked like someone, but you would not tell me who? And even though my dad told me they wouldn't be long, I was really scared.
I was so afraid that I was going to let out the secret. I would say things, then I would have to just stop talking because I was afraid I was going to say too much.
That must have been really hard to do. I remember when Dad called the first time, I secretly listened from the other room.
Sneaky. Did you hear anything?
Only that you said that I needed to know about Elizabeth.
I think a few days after the phone call, I took you to go swimming, right?
Yes. I remember in the locker room, there was a woman who wouldn't stop staring at me. She looked like she saw a ghost. She told me that I looked like someone she knew a long time ago, after hearing things here and there about this Elizabeth girl, and how I looked like someone everyone used to know. I started to piece things together.
I could tell. Especially after you asked me if you looked like Elizabeth. But I'd promised your father that I wouldn't talk about it.
Then my mother called. She was acting so strange, even calling me Elizabeth. She told me she dreamed that I died. Then my father interrupted. He finally admitted that Elizabeth was real, but is now dead, and she was my sister.
After that phone call, I thought you deserved some answers. I told you Elizabeth was born in June 1978 and my daughter Joss born in August. Elizabeth and Joss were best friends. On the way home from an amusement park they all went to for her 13th birthday, there was a car accident. Your mother was driving. Elizabeth died. Not long after, your mother and father left town, and I never heard from them again, until you arrived here.
I was starting to piece things together now, but not everything. I saw news on TV about a man named Dalton Van Dyne. He was CEO of a company that researched cloning. He had disappeared with $6 million and just got out of jail.
Yes. And then I slipped that your dad was a doctor who did medical research, when you always thought your dad was a bank money manager.
After that, things started to get hectic. The phone would ring and no one would talk when we answered. My father also called saying he was scared and I shouldn't be left alone.
And then Joss came to visit. Oh, here she is now. She had the same look of surprise that everyone did when they saw you. I could tell you were confused when she said Elizabeth's last name was Krull, instead of Cole.
Oops, but after we were acquainted, we watched old home videos of Elizabeth and myself.
Watching the videos, I felt like I was looking in a mirror. Elizabeth and I looked exactly alike.
The next day we received a package from your dad with $10,000 and 4 birth certificates that all had the name Bethany, but with different last names. I wondered if your father was doing something illegal.
We all might have thought that. And then the next day is when I found everything out. My mom called, asking to talk to Elizabeth, so I pretended I was her. She was saying how the doctor said that I would die, but my dad can get me back. If Dad could get some of Elizabeth's cells, they'd make a copy of her. A clone. I fainted. When I woke up, I started to freak out. This couldn't be possible. I am Bethany Cole. Not some copy of a girl. I ran outside and all the way to town square. Joss had chased me, and as we sat down to calm ourselves, a car pulled up. He asked if everything was all right and called us by our first names. He even called me Bethany, not Elizabeth. Joss had no clue who he was. He asked if we needed a ride. Then a police car pulled up.
The man sped off. We got a ride back with the policeman.
The next day we reread the letter that came with the money. It talked about how a man is hunting down Bethany's dad. The man had got out of prison early. He said that it is not safe to come back now. He cannot even call because that will bring him back to Bethany. Gee whiz.
The next day was Halloween. After the trick-or-treaters had gone back to their homes, a man showed up. I answered the door and he called me Bethany. It was the same man in the car that none of us knew. He asked if my dad was here. Joss asked the man who he was, and he said to just tell Walter, my dad, that he had stopped by. He started walking away, so I called after him. I called him Dalton, the man that recently got out of jail. He hesitated when I called him that, but he continued on his way. That's when we decided to call the police.
The police officer came and we gave him a very abridged version of the last 5 days. We didn't tell him about the cloning, the money, or the birth certificates.
That night I woke up and on the computer googled Dalton Van Dyne. An article came up of him talking about researching human cloning. I was almost positive that he was wanting to clone himself. Then the doorbell rang.
Oh yes. This was when the police officer came back.
The police officer had received a bulletin that said that Dalton Van Dyne is now in this town. The officer showed everyone a photo and asked if this was the man that came to the door. No doubt it was. Then I realized. Dalton did not only want to talk to my father. He wanted to show me off to the world, proving that I am Elizabeth's clone.
The officer called later and told us the FBI is coming into town to investigate, but also to find out what the real problem is.
And I already know the real problem. It's me.
Oh honey. You are not a problem.
Whatever, Auntie. That day, to get our minds off of Dalton, we went to the town's October festival. When we were there, I saw my parents coming towards me. But I also saw Dalton following me. I was so close to my parents when Dalton yelled to them, "Where is he?" Then I realized it. Dalton had paid my dad to make a Dalton clone. Instead of making Dalton's clone, my dad had made me. I told Dalton that, and I felt proud. Dalton started crying. The man I've been scared of started crying. We all went back to Auntie's house and Joss had long talks with Dalton. He was lonely and wanted a clone for a friend. My dad explained everything to me. Even though I started as a cloned embryo, my mom was the surrogate mother and gave birth to me.
Dalton gave all of his money to charity and opened a home for less fortunate boys. And our family?
You can say we've got a pretty normal life now. Well, sort of.